Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Titan's Curse. We're going to be doing a recap of that. If you guys haven't seen the previous videos, I have gone over both the Lightning Thief and the Sea of Monsters in those previous videos, so go check those out if you haven't seen them already. And I'm going to also be talking about the Battle of the Labyrinth and Last Olympian in my next upcoming videos. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on those, make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss those uploads. We've had a great time talking about this so far. I'm excited to keep going. Once again, I'm going to be talking about quickly the art that I am using for the little collage of characters. Firstly, the majority of the art comes from the official Rick Riordan website and the official art for that, which is done by Viktoria Ridzel. Love the art. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I just knew that's where I'd be able to find most of the characters, so that's why I chose to use that. I'm also using some art from the graphic novels for the series, which is done by Rocco. Also fantastic. And if I couldn't find anything else, I found other characters from other pieces of media that seem to fit well with characters from this series, so that is what I have done. I haven't talked about this before, but if you're wondering why I'm not using pictures of the cast from the show, minus Hermes, because I think it's hilarious that Lin-Manuel Miranda was cast as Hermes, it's just because they've only really cast people for the first season, so it would have been really difficult to find people for the next 4 books, so that's why I didn't choose people from the show to do this. Obviously, it'd be a different story if we'd gotten more of a cast, but we just had the cast for the first season, so that is why I didn't do that, if you are wondering. I just didn't want to have to struggle to find like a million other characters and have a weird hodgepodge of like some official like TV cast members, some fan art, I wanted to try and keep it as consistent as possible. So that's why I did that. I probably should have talked about this sooner, but in case you're wondering, that's why I did that. All right, without further ado, let's get interrupted by the bathroom in my dorm. And so without further ado, let's just get into the video. All right, so once again, we got to start with our favorite chapter titles, of course. So for the Titan's Curse, we have the vice principal gets a missile launcher, I go snowboarding with a pig, and I have a damn problem. All right, so we are opening on the Friday before winter break, and Sally, Percy's mom, is driving Percy, Annabeth, and Thalia all the way up from Long Island, New York to Bar Harbor, Maine. Quite the drive. I've done a drive that's very similar to that. It was a long time to sit in a car. So Sally is talking everybody's ear off, telling the girls about embarrassing baby stories about Percy. And the group is on their way to Westover Hall. Westover Hall looked like an evil knight's castle. It was all black stone with towers and slit windows and a big set of wooden double doors. It stood on a snowy cliff overlooking this big frosty forest on one side and the gray churning ocean on the other. As someone who's seen the Maine Ocean in the winter, it looks frozen. It's so cold. It looks like you could freeze the second you go anywhere near it. It is so cold. Anyways, Grover contacted camp saying that he had found 2 Half-Bloods and the trio had been sent to go and help him and bring them back to Camp Half-Blood. As soon as they get inside the school, they are stopped by a guy with a French accent and a woman who tells them that there's no visitors allowed inside. Thalia then steps forward, snaps her fingers, and she's like, "Oh, you do know us. We go to this school." And the woman is convinced. Thalia just pulled off a little like Jedi mind trick thing and is able to convince the woman that like, yes, the 3 of them are students. The man with the French accent's not super convinced, but his colleague is, so there's nothing he can really do about it. They're able to get inside, they find Grover, and as they're walking inside, Percy is like, "Hey, how did you do that?" And Thalia's just like, "Oh, the mist thing? I thought Chiron showed you how to do that." And Percy's just like, "Dang it, what else don't I know?" So Grover fills them in, saying that there are 2 demigods, a brother and a sister, as well as 1 monster in the building. The satyrs have apparently been put on overtime trying to recruit more demigods, since Luke has been rather persuasive and is kind of plucking up demigods here and there, so they need to rebuild up their numbers. So the monster, on the other hand, is the man that they just met with the French accent, Dr. Thorne. And then Grover points out the two demigods, Bianca and Nico D'Angelo. It's the group trying to blend in, so they start mingling, and Thalia ends up dragging Grover onto the dance floor. Percy and Annabeth are kind of like awkwardly talking for about a minute before Thalia's like, you guys look so awkward there, go and dance. Annabeth tells Percy that her dad is moving to San Francisco, which she is making out to be this really bad thing. We don't know why, but Percy notices that Bianca and Nico are no longer in the gym, and he spots Dr. Thorne leaving through a door. So Annabeth's like, we need to go find Grover and Thalia, but she and Percy end up getting separated. So Percy's like, all right, I gotta go after these kids. I gotta get them before Thorne does something to them. He ends up finding them in the entrance hall, looking terrified before he feels this really sharp pain in his shoulder, and he gets slammed up against the wall by Thorne, and he tells Percy that all three of them are going to follow him. Thorne also seems to have this like projectile that he is throwing. That's what hit Percy in the shoulder. Percy doesn't know what it is though. So they're outside, and Percy is trying to contact Grover through the empathy link that Grover had set up the previous summer, but he can't seem to get through to him. They reach a clearing, and Bianca's like, all right, what is going on? I need some answers, and no one's giving her anything. They are at a cliff now. They're looking over the ocean, and Percy's like, I could jump, I could get away, but that would leave Bianca and Nico. So at this point, all Percy can really do is stall, so he kind of comes to the conclusion that Thorne must be working for Luke, because anytime something bad goes wrong, it's usually connected to Luke. Thorne, though, is like, no, I work for the general. And he also mentions something about the Great Stirring, whatever that is. Luckily, reinforcements have arrived, and Annabeth, wearing her invisibility hat, is able to slam into Percy and the D'Angelos, knocking them to the ground and startling Thorne enough for Thalia to be able to get a couple good hits in with her spear. Annabeth quickly fills Percy in. Thorne is a manticore, and Nico starts muttering something that sounds like stats, but there's no time to like figure out what any of that means. So Percy summons the shield that Tyson made for him the previous summer, but it quickly gets dented by these thorns that Dr. Thorne is throwing, quite the name. And it's pretty much beyond repair at this point. It's really, really gone. So the fight is not going well for them, but they soon hear a hunting horn coming from the distance in the woods, and Thorne just freezes, and then a dozen silver arrows pelt him. A bunch of young female archers exit the woods. Annabeth calls them the Hunters, and Thalia is not happy to see them at all. Thorne knows he is cornered now, so he is about to advance on Percy and Thalia, knowing that they are the weakest right now because Percy's injured and Thalia did most of the fighting. So he's advancing on them, and Annabeth decides to jump on his back to try and stop him. And rather than just like shaking her off, Thorne jumps off the cliff with Annabeth still on his back. The Hunters like advance on the group, and Thalia is just glaring specifically at one of them, who she calls Zoe Nightshade. Percy is absolutely distraught over the whole Annabeth thing when a young girl who's about like 13, it looks like, who seems to be the leader of the Hunters, steps up and introduces herself as the goddess Artemis. Grover quickly starts fawning over her because Artemis is kind of like a nature-esque goddess, so nature, Grover, you get the connection. But Thalia is not having a good time with the Hunters being there and the whole Annabeth thing. She's going through it. Bianca, on the other hand, has had enough and starts demanding answers, to which everyone around kind of starts to fill her in, briefly, get the summary. Artemis then asks to speak to Bianca alone and takes her into one of the tents that has been set up. Thalia is absolutely furious with Percy for going after Thorne on his own, believing that if they had just stuck together, Annabeth wouldn't have been taken. Grover is able to fix the wound on Percy's shoulder, but Percy is just feeling super guilty about what went down. He kind of agrees with Thalia that maybe he shouldn't have gone after Thorne on his own, and about the whole Annabeth thing too. Nico ends up coming over afterwards and shows Percy this set of figurines that he has, and it's for a game that he plays called Mythomagic. So it's a game about Greek gods and heroes and monsters. So that was what the whole stats thing that he was talking about. It was the stats from his game. Honestly, Nico is a huge nerd. It's adorable. So Zoe then comes over and says that Artemis wants to speak with Percy. And when he gets there, he like explains the whole like thing that Thorin was talking about with the great stirring, as well as the general. And Zoe doesn't seem very happy about the whole general mention. So Artemis, though, seems determined to hunt this monster that Thorin seems to be after, and says that she's gonna have to leave and she's doing it alone, much to Zoe's dismay. Artemis then turns to Bianca and is like, all right, it is time for you to make your decision. Percy's pretty confused, and Artemis explains that she has asked Bianca to join the hunt. Percy is adamant that she can't do that, she needs to come back to camp to train, and Zoe's like, girls can join the hunt, and it's just as effective as going to camp. It's probably even better. It is better, according to Zoe. So if she joins the hunt, Bianca would become immortal unless slain in battle, but she would also have to swear off men for all eternity, for as long as she lives, essentially. Percy is then like, wait, what about Nico? What are you gonna do? And Artemis is like, don't worry, he can go to camp. He will be taken care of. So being free from that responsibility of having to take care of Nico is really what seems to be the most appealing to Bianca, so she accepts and she joins the hunt. So now it is time for the hunters and the couple campers to head back to Camp Half-Blood while Artemis goes off hunting this monster, and she's like, all right, I'm gonna get my brother Apollo to give you a ride. Grover's a little nervous because last time the hunters at camp, things didn't really go very well. So he's a little nervous about that. But just then a bright light explodes over the horizon, and suddenly there's this very, very nice like red sports car just sitting in the like snowy field. And who was driving that sports car? Apollo. Thalia quickly says, wow, he's hot. And Percy's like, yeah, he's the sun god. I love that line. Artemis and Apollo are absolutely siblings. They immediately start bickering, but Apollo agrees to take everybody to camp, and his sports car turns into a bright yellow school bus so everyone can fit. And he's like, you know what, Thalia, you can drive. You know, you're almost 16. And she does not seem too keen about this, but she does it. However, she ends up crashing the bus into Long Island Sound. So, not great. Luckily, everyone's okay, though. So, once they are fully at camp, the hunters head off to the Artemis cabin to, you know, unpack and rewind. Unwind. That's the word. While the others go off to tell Chiron about what happened. Once they get there, Chiron sends Grover off with Nico to show him the orientation film, and Percy and Thalia fill him in. Chiron wants the two of them to immediately go out and try and find Annabeth, but Mr. D does not love that idea. He's like, no, it's not a good idea right now, which pisses Percy and Thalia off completely. So they don't really get much more time to talk because Chiron's like, all right, you guys need to go and get ready. We're going to do Capture the Flag tomorrow. It is a tradition whenever the hunters are at camp. So, two of them leave, and Percy promises Thalia that they are going to find Annabeth, even though he has no idea how yet. He apologizes for going after Thorn alone. Now, with Capture the Flag, the two of them agree to be co-captains because they can't really decide who would be a better captain, so they're just like, let's co-captain. We learn a little bit about Thalia's mom here. Thalia had tried to go back to California, where she was from, to find her mom after she had basically come to life again from the whole tree thing, and found out that her mom had died in a drunk driving accident a couple of years ago. Percy then comes to the conclusion that that must be why Thalia was so nervous to drive the Sun bus, because of her mom dying from drunk driving. Now, as they are walking around, we learn from some of the other campers that Clarice has gone on a secret mission for Chiron, and nobody's heard from her in a while. So back in the Poseidon cabin, Percy finds that there has been a saltwater fountain installed in his cabin with golden drachmas at the bottom of it for iris messaging. So he's like, all right, time to make some calls. He calls Tyson first, who tells Percy that a whole bunch of the old sea spirits have now risen and are protecting the Princess Andromeda, which is Luke's ship, and it's making it very difficult for Poseidon to try and take it down. That night, Percy dreams of Annabeth and sees her on this dark hillside surrounded by ruins. Luke is at the top, clearly in pain, and he's calling out for help. And it looks like there's something like invisible that's like squishing him to death. He pleads with Annabeth to help him, and she does, getting into like a similar position that Luke is in to help him carry the burden of whatever he's holding. But rather than actually sharing it, Luke steps away, leaving Annabeth to carry whatever it is on her own. And Percy wakes up now knowing two things. One, Annabeth is in danger, and two, Luke is responsible. So that next morning, Percy fills Grover in about his dream, and Grover says that Zoe had a similar dream, and apparently Grover had like staked out of the Artemis cabin to see if the hunters would like need anything, and ended up following Zoe to the big house where she told Chiron about her dream. From what he overheard, it seems like Zoe thinks that Artemis is in trouble and needs the hunters, and has asked for permission to leave camp, but Chiron refused. And Grover kind of thinks the whole situation's a little weird, and he's wondering if Percy and Zoe's dreams are connected. He also thinks that the hunters showing up at Westover Hall might have been part of a effort to try and recruit demigods to the hunt, and even mentions that he found a brochure for the hunters in Annabeth's backpack. Percy absolutely hates the thought of this and tries to push that thought away all day, but it doesn't work. He even manages to like sneak up to the Oracle to try and get a quest, and that doesn't work either. All right, capture the flag time. It's campers versus hunters. Percy and Thalia are very much struggling to work together, but Percy finally like resigns to like stay on defense. Nico is there, and he's like geeking out over everything because it's just like his game. It's so cool. But Percy's really not in the mood. So while he's on defense, Percy sees an opportunity to try and go for the flag, and he does, but it ends up not working and being detrimental and allowing the hunters to win. So Thalia is very, very pissed, and she and Percy start fighting. They're both using their powers, which Thalia's got like electric powers and Percy's got the water powers, and it's getting pretty physical. Thalia even summons lightning at one point, using her spear as a conductor and sending it straight into Percy's chest, which sounds like it would hurt. And Percy's about to retaliate when he sees something out of the corner of his eye walking into the forest. The Oracle has somehow managed to leave the attic and walk all the way into the forest, and she approaches Zoe, and here's where we get our prophecy for the book. 5 shall go west to the goddess in chains. 1 shall be lost in the land without rain. The bane of Olympus shows the trail. Campers and hunters combined prevail. The Titan's curse 1 must withstand, and 1 shall perish by a parent's hand. Ominous. Anyways, Percy and Grover are elected to carry the Oracle back to the attic because it can't walk back for some reason. And while doing so, Grover kind of wonders aloud if the Great Stirring has anything to do with the nature god Pan, who he has been looking for. There is then a meeting of all the cabin counselors to discuss the prophecy in the big house. They meet around this like ping pong table, and apparently this is where all of the important discussions are held. Zoe and Bianca are there as well, but Zoe is not happy. She's like, we need to leave immediately, but Thalia's like, hold on. The prophecy said hunters and campers. So we need to talk about this. You guys can't just scurry off on your own. You need some of us. Percy is the one to suggest maybe we do 3 hunters and 2 campers. You know, it is Zoe's quest. We give him a little more hunters, but we still get some campers involved. The whole meeting, though, is pretty tense, as the prophecy made it pretty clear that 2 people are going to die. So that's not super, like, there's not a really strong vote of confidence for the quest going on. Eventually, they determine that Zoe is going to go, accompanied by Bianca as well as another hunter named Phoebe. At this point, the two Stoll brothers, Connor and Travis, tell Zoe that they have a t-shirt that they want to give Phoebe. And it is quite clear to anyone that knows the Stoll brothers that they are absolutely up to something, but Zoe doesn't know them, so she's like, okay, sure, I'll take it. So as for the campers, Grover and Thalia are the first to volunteer, which Zoe accepts. But then Percy's doing the math and he's like, what? I'm not included in that 5. No, I need to go. And he protests, but Zoe's like, I'm not going with a man. But apparently Grover doesn't count. Chiron does not like this decision either, but he agrees that it's Zoe's quest, she gets to decide. So afterwards, Chiron confides in Percy that he really doesn't want either him or Thalia to go, but maybe it is for the best and Percy can like just go home and spend the holidays with his mom. And Percy like is contemplating life. He takes out his sword and Chiron's like, oh, that's why Zoe doesn't want you to go. I forgot about that. Yeah, that would explain it, because apparently the sword has a very long and tragic past. Percy heads back to his cabin to Iris message his mom, but once he does, he sees that she's sitting with another guy at the kitchen table, and the two of them are like laughing. So the guy leaves for a moment, and Percy is able to talk to his mom and fill her in on everything. And she tells him to do what he thinks he has to do, and that his heart is like always in the right place. And she's like, I know you're gonna do what is best for Annabeth because she would do the same for you. So Percy dreams of Annabeth once again, and she is still trapped under whatever force Luke trapped her under. And there are 2 voices there as well. One is Luke's and one Percy does not recognize. Luke is insistent that they need to hurry because Annabeth's fading, but then none other than Artemis is being led forward in chains. They tell the goddess to make her decision, and she decides to take the weight of whatever Annabeth was holding from her. She then tells the unknown voice that he will never find the monster, but the voice just says that he needs to go and greet the quest. So Percy is awoken by a Pegasus outside of his cabin. This Pegasus is one that Percy had rescued from Luke's ship the previous summer at the end of his Sea of Monsters quest. I forgot to mention that in the last one. This Pegasus' name is Blackjack, and he insists on calling Percy boss, because Percy can speak to horses, remember? Blackjack needs his help, and Percy gets the feeling that he's probably not going to be coming back to his cabin for a while, so he takes Annabeth's invisibility hat that he had found on the ground in Maine and goes off with Blackjack. So Blackjack takes him down to the beach where Percy dives into the ocean, finding a whole bunch of hippocampi around what looks to be a sea cow stuck in the net, stuck in a net. It's thrashing around, and the hippocampi are pleading with Percy to free it, which Percy does, naming the sea cow Bessie for some reason. Flying back into camp, Percy sees Nico spying on Bianca and Zoe and decides to investigate. Here we learn that the t-shirt that the Stoll brothers gave Phoebe was covered in centaur blood, which is poisonous, and Phoebe's gonna be okay, but she can't go on the quest. So Bianca's like, all right, should we pick somebody new? And Zoe's like, no, I don't want to, and we were supposed to lose someone in the land without rain, and if you remember, weather doesn't affect Camp Half-Blood, so maybe that's what this meant. But it does feel a little bit too easy. Zoe doesn't want another camper to go, but she doesn't want to risk another hunter, and then Bianca mentioned something about telling Thalia about her dream, and Zoe's like, no, I'm not doing that. It looks like Nico is about to go after his sister, but Percy is able to stop him, being like, no, you can't go. It's not safe. You're gonna get yourself killed. Nico then asks Percy to try to keep his sister safe, and Percy begrudgingly promises. Then Percy and Blackjack fly off to go follow the van that the quest members are using. So they're flying around for a while, eventually stopping to take a breather when grapevines start snagging around Blackjack's legs. Mr. D is there, and he is rather upset with Percy for leaving camp without permission. This is 2 summers in a row now. Percy insists that he needs to be on this quest, and Mr. D ends up just telling him a story. He tells Percy of Ariadne, the young princess who helped Theseus escape the labyrinth, who was eventually left behind by that hero. Mr. D found her and eventually made her his wife, but ever since he has had a small disdain for heroes, as they will always betray those around them for their own needs. and he mentions that Zoe Nightshade would know this very well. He eventually tells Percy to go, and when he questions this, Mr. D just says that he hopes that Percy is one of the two that dies. Lovely. I love to see that kind of enthusiasm from a head counselor of a camp for kids. So, Percy and Blackjack follow the van all the way to Maryland. Apparently they need to stop in Washington, D.C. for something. And Percy overhears Bianca say something about how she and Nico used to live in D.C., but it was weird because she'd forgotten that they had lived there until someone mentioned the place. The crew heads into the Smithsonian, but Percy notices that they are being followed by none other than Dr. Thorne, of course. Once inside, Percy sees Thorne meet up with Luke and another man that Percy realizes must be the General. There seems to be a sort of power struggle between Thorne and the General, but there is something that is on their way to intercept the Quest group. And while talking about... Damn, someone's not happy. And while they're talking about this, the General mentions something about how they need to try and isolate Thalia. So we then see this soldier planting something that looks like teeth in the ground, and at first a bunch of little kittens jump out of the ground. This will be important significantly later. And different teeth apparently get planted, and a whole bunch of skeleton warriors with pieces of flesh coming off of their bones jump out instead. And this is where that little group below seems to figure out that somebody is watching them, so Percy's gotta hightail it out of there. Percy ends up running directly into the Quest group and fills them all in. And Zoe is just in denial about the General, but Percy insists, no, this is definitely him. Nobody is necessarily excited to see Percy, but they've all kind of come to the conclusion that he might as well go with them. We're gonna go with 5, so might as well have him there. They are about to leave when they run into the Nemean lion, the same lion that Hercules fought during his 12 labors. Fight's difficult because nothing can pierce the lion's skin. So Percy figures out that they need to go for the lion's mouth instead, and is able to grab some astronaut food, the kind that activates with water, from the gift shop, which he launches into the lion's mouth. From there, Zoe and Bianca are able to shoot a whole bunch of arrows into the mouth, killing the lion and leaving its pelt behind. Zoe tells Percy that it's his, and he begrudgingly agrees with the others that Percy was meant to be the 5th member of their quest. Thorne is still following the group, so they have to ditch the van and start using the subway to try and lose him. Bianca is able to direct them throughout the different trains, but mentions that she was surprised to see the subway the last time she was in DC because it certainly wasn't there when she and Nico lived there. Everyone's really confused because the subway looked really old, but Bianca's like, no, it absolutely wasn't there. But they don't have time to discuss it more because they are still being followed and need to keep changing trains. They are able to eventually ride the train all the way to the end of the line, where they find a homeless man there who offers them to warm up around his fire. And he then tells the group that he has a train going west for them before pointing to a train that reads Sun West Line. The homeless man is gone, however, before they can ask him anything else. It's a very nice train. They all get their own cars, but Percy joins Thalia's to talk for a moment. He tells her what the General said about her and the monster, and she fills him in, saying that the group is going to San Francisco. This is also where Annabeth's dad was moving, and Percy asks Thalia about this, and she's like, it's really bad for demigods because the mist is super thick there, and it's really close to the biggest remnants of Titan magic. So lots of monsters are drawn there as well. So we get to learn a little bit about Thalia's history with the Hunters as well, and they apparently had tried to recruit her while she, Luke, and Annabeth were making their way to camp, and she didn't join because she didn't want to leave Luke, which led to her and Zoe fighting, and Zoe telling her that Luke would let her down one day. Percy reminds her that they're going to have to fight Luke, but Thalia doesn't want to talk about this and ends up kicking Percy out of her car. She does tell him that Annabeth also recently considered joining the Hunters. When Percy gets back to his car, the homeless man is there, and Percy quickly figures out that this guy is Apollo. He explains that this is his way of helping them as the train's moving super fast and is getting them across the entire central United States. Apollo has no idea where Artemis and Annabeth are, nor does he know what the monster is, but he does advise Percy to seek out Nereus, the Old Man of the Sea, in San Francisco, as he has a gift of knowledge that even the Oracle does not. Percy wants some more information, but Apollo just disappears, because of course he does. It's time for another dream, and this time Percy is not himself. He is somebody else, and there is a girl there with him who warns him that he needs to hurry and that he should be afraid even after Percy insists that he'll be fine. The girl explains that the only way to get what he needs is for him to go up the mountain and strike a deal with her father. She then gives him her hairpin and says that he can make it a weapon. Once he takes it, it grows into a sword that is all too familiar in Percy's hands. An Aclysmus, or Riptide. When he wakes up, he's able to figure out two things. Obviously, the sword from the dream is the sword he's using now, and the girl was Zoe Nightshade. So the train finally stops in New Mexico, and Percy fills Grover in on his conversation with Apollo, and then the group splits up to find food and directions. So Percy and Bianca get a chance to talk here for a little bit, and Bianca says that becoming a hunter has allowed her to become more at peace, but she's still worried about Nico, and Percy reassures her that he's going to be fine at camp. We get to learn a little bit about Bianca and Nico's backstory here. Bianca thinks that they went to a boarding school in DC, but were then told that their parents had died. They were eventually taken away by a lawyer to stay at a hotel for a few weeks before being taken through DC, again all the way to Westover Hall. Bianca has essentially been raising Nico for her entire life, and while it's selfish, that was a big part of the reason that she joined the hunt. Percy is about to ask Bianca about her conversation with Zoe before the quest, when Zoe and Grover come back, and they're about to get a move on when Grover freezes. I was about to ask what was wrong when a warm breeze rustled past like a gust of springtime had gotten lost in the middle of winter. Fresh air seasoned with wildflowers and sunshine, and something else, almost like a voice trying to say something. A warning. Zoe gasped, "Grover, thy cup." Grover dropped his coffee cup, which was decorated with pictures of birds. Suddenly the birds peeled off the cup and flew away, a flock of tiny doves. My rubber rat squeaked. It scampered off the railing and into the trees. Real fur, real whiskers. Grover collapsed next to his coffee, which steamed against the snow. We gathered around him, trying to wake him up. He groaned, his eyes fluttering. What's going on with Grover, everybody? We don't know. So Grover is down for the count, but they need to get moving, and they end up getting stopped by the skeleton warriors from DC. Grover is muttering something about the gift of the wild, but the others don't have time to worry about that, so they end up fighting, and the fight's not going well, and the skeleton warriors can't seem to die. However, Bianca seems to get what looks like a lucky stab in killing one of them. A wild boar then just appears, and Grover quickly tells the others, "Don't kill it, don't kill it. This is a gift from the wild." And they're able to get on the boar and use that as like a way out of that situation. As they are riding, both Grover and Zoe insist that they felt something super powerful back there, and Grover's like, it's gotta be the god of the wild, Pan. He definitely felt him there. Eventually the boar does have to stop to eat, so they decide it's best to get off and start making their own way before the boar turns on them. This is where one of the biggest questions seems to arise for everybody. How in the world did Bianca kill one of those skeleton warriors? She has no idea, and they're like, okay, maybe it was your knife, but Zoe's like, nope, I've got the same knife. Mine didn't do anything. But Bianca ends up just kind of changing the conversation, like she doesn't want to talk about it at all. Zoe then is like, all right, we are in Arizona. The nearest really big city for us right now is Las Vegas. We should try going there. And Bianca just freaks out, saying that they shouldn't go there because that was one of the places she and Nico had been, and she can't seem to quite remember it. Percy then seems to get this like big realization. He asks Bianca if she and Nico has stayed in the Lotus Hotel, and Bianca's like, yeah, how did you know that? Percy gives everyone a rundown, explaining that the hotel speeds up time while you are in there, but Bianca seems to be in complete denial. But it's pretty much confirmed at this point. We learn that she and Nico essentially spent 70 years in the Lotus Hotel. The one that's like, no, The one thing that's kind of confusing for Percy is he doesn't understand how they were able to get out, but Bianca reminds him that, hey, a lawyer came and got us. They are soon interrupted by car headlights as a limo pulls up right next to them, and out steps an oddly familiar large man, pointing a sword directly at Percy's throat. Ares. He assures the group that it is a friendly meeting and tells Percy that somebody wants to speak with him. As soon as Percy gets in the limo, his jaw drops. She was wearing a red satin dress and her hair was curled in a cascade of ringlets. Her face was the most beautiful I'd ever seen. Perfect makeup, dazzling eyes, a smile that would have lit up the dark side of the moon. Looking back on it, I can't tell you who she looked like, or even what color her hair or her eyes were. Pick the most beautiful actress you can think of. The goddess was 10 times more beautiful than that. Pick your favorite hair color, eye color, whatever. The goddess had that. When she smiled at me, just for a moment, she looked a little like Annabeth. Then, this television actress I used to have a crush on in 5th grade. Then, well, you get the idea. Annabeth. Dude's got a crush. He's got a crush. We know. We know. It is Aphrodite, the goddess of love. She asks Percy why he's on this quest, and Percy's like, I'm here to find Artemis. And she's just like, ugh, no. You're on the quest for a different reason. And finally, Percy admits that that's not the reason that he's on the quest. He's like, I'm here to find Annabeth. And Aphrodite just beams. She's like, this is so sweet. But Percy's like, no, it's not what you seem to think it is. And Aphrodite's like, I'm on your side. I am on your side. I've been helping you. I sent Blackjack, by the way. She's like, you know, a quest for a monster is so boring, but a quest for true love, whew, I love those. Percy is once again in denial. He's like, again, that's not what I meant. But Aphrodite tells him to just forget the hunters and Artemis and focus on finding Annabeth. And she also warns him not to take anything from her husband's junkyard. So Ares drags Percy out of the car at this point, and Percy's like, you know, why haven't you killed me yet? And it essentially boils down to the fact that Percy might start the biggest war ever, and Ares doesn't want to get in the way of that. Percy gets back to the others, and all he tells them about his conversation with Aphrodite is that she said not to touch anything in the junkyard, which everyone is super suspicious of because there's no way she just came to tell him that, but they don't press him on it. So now they have to walk through this giant junkyard, which we have now learned belongs to the god Hephaestus. As they are walking, Percy and Zoe are really just keeping everyone else from grabbing things, and eventually they need to climb over this giant pile of garbage, essentially, and there's part of it that looks like toes that belong to a foot, but it's kind of weird. So Bianca's like, we could just go around, but Percy and Zoe are like, nope. Our destination's literally right over this, so we just go over it. So as they are climbing over this giant pile, the pile comes to life as a giant metal robot who Zoe calls Talos. It's one of Hephaestus's creations, meant to guard the junkyard, which means that somebody must have taken something. And Bianca is looking very guilty. So they're fighting the monster, and Bianca eventually confesses to Percy that she found the one figurine that Nico didn't have in his collection and decided to take it. She tries to put it back, but it doesn't work. And the two of them eventually figure out that there must be a way to control the giant, and Bianca forms a plan. She tells Percy to get the monster to raise his foot, and Percy does not like this plan, but he goes along with it, and she ends up giving Percy the figurine, telling him to tell Nico that she's sorry. They're able to get Talos to raise his foot, and Bianca runs underneath. Percy isn't able to see what happens, but the monster suddenly starts jerking around and moving in weird directions. Bianca was able to get control of him. However, Talos is now stumbling towards some power lines. He ends up tripping on them, which sends a shockwave through his body and causes him to fall apart. The others frantically search through the rubble, but there is no sign of Bianca anywhere. And then Grover remembers the prophecy, one shall die in the land without rain. They were in the desert, and Bianca D'Angelo was dead. Ooh, heartbreaking. heartbreaking right there. They end up finding a truck outside of the junkyard and using that to continue driving, and all Percy can think about is how he's going to tell Nico. The truck eventually runs out of gas and they end up at a river and steal a couple of canoes to make their way down the river, and Percy and Zoe end up in one together. Percy reassures Zoe that what happened to Bianca was not Zoe's fault, but Zoe's like, no, I pressured her into this because I hoped that she would be able to become the new lieutenant at some point. I wanted her to be ready for that. She also blames herself for Artemis being captured because she thinks that if she had gone with Artemis, it never would have happened, but Percy's like, Artemis is a goddess. I'm not sure you being there would have stopped whatever was able to capture her. Percy ends up asking Zoe about a riptide and tells her about the dream he had of her, but Zoe refuses to say the name of the hero that she originally gave the sword to. But she does tell him that she was originally one of the Hesperides who guard the tree with the golden apples, and she was exiled because she helped a hero. The conversation stops though because they have reached the Hoover Dam, and Percy, Grover, and Thalia are quick to start sprouting out facts about it since it was one of Annabeth's favorite pieces of architecture and she was constantly talking about it. They figure this is as good a place as any to stop and rest, and they end up splitting up, Percy staying outside and the others trying to go and find the snack bar inside. So while he's waiting, Percy ends up hearing a moo from behind him, and Bessie is there. Before he can figure out why Bessie is there, he ends up spotting some of the skeleton warriors and has to run inside to try and warn the others. He ends up in an elevator with a tour group, and the tour guide looks very familiar to him. She ends up stopping Percy at one point and tells him that there is always a way out for those clever enough to find it. And Percy makes a note of her gray eyes like storm clouds. Percy ends up finding a place to hide as he's being chased, and he hears something behind him, so he just blindly swings his sword at what he thinks is a skeleton warrior, but is actually a mortal girl who is just blowing her nose. The sword does nothing because celestial bronze doesn't affect mortals, but somehow this girl can see the sword, which should not be possible. The mist should have disguised it. She starts demanding answers because obviously you'd want some if some dude just swung a sword at you, but Percy has no answers. But she eventually tells him that her name is Rachel Elizabeth Dare. We got full name there. And she does end up helping him a little bit, sending these skeletons in the wrong direction. And all Percy tells her is his first name before running away. Percy finds the others and they're all getting ready to leave, although Thalia's not too happy, she just got food. And at the entrance of the dam, there are a couple of statues of angels that are meant to be in honor of Zeus, and Percy tells Thalia that she's got to pray to her dad. Thalia's like, it's not gonna work, but Percy's like, it will because Athena just told me it will. The tour guide was Athena. Thalia ends up doing it, and it takes a moment, but suddenly the first little angel guy stands up. The other one stands up as well, and Thalia's like, hey, can you guys get us out of here? And the angels do. One grabs Thalia and Percy, and the other grabs Zoe and Grover, and they fly straight up and away from the dam. Thalia's not having a good time, and this is where we learn that she's got a fear of heights. It's kind of ironic, though, with her dad being the god of the sky and all. Percy ends up filling her in on the whole Rachel Elizabeth Dare situation, and Thalia tells him that some mortals just kind of have that ability to see through the mist, and Percy's like, oh, wait a minute. My mom can do that. Finally, the crew reaches San Francisco, and they are able to quickly find Nereus. Percy goes over to him, completely just jumping him, and they end up in the water. They're on a pier, and Nereus, being an old sea spirit, is like having a good time too, and he's like changing into these different aquatic animals, but Percy is somehow able to keep his hold on him, and Nereus eventually resigns, the two going back up to the pier. So Nereus is like, all right, you got me. I will answer one question per capture. This causes Percy to pause for a moment because he's like, I have a lot of questions. I want to know about the monster. I want to know about Annabeth And I want to know about Artemis, all three of them. I need a lot of answers. However, he ends up asking about the monster, and Nereus just smiles, telling them that the monster is right over there before he jumps back into the water. The group turns, and who is there? Bessie. Bessie the sea cow is there. Percy sort of fills everyone in on what's been going on with Bessie, and luckily Grover is able to speak to Bessie, explaining that he is the Ophiotaurus and that his protector is Percy. Zoe seems to know the story and confirms that this is the monster that they have been looking for. Apparently, sacrificing the Ophiotaurus gives the person who sacrificed him the power to destroy the gods, as there is a lot of power in killing innocents. So, it is now very important to them that they protect the Ophiotaurus from Luke and the general. And just then, they hear a voice from behind them. Dr. Thorne is back. Thorne reveals that this has been the plan all along, to bring Thalia back to life so that she can sacrifice the Ophiotaurus on her 16th birthday and use that power to overthrow the gods on Olympus. She is going to be the child of the big three from the Great Prophecy. Thorne is now trying to appeal to Thalia using Luke, and it kind of leaves Thalia like in a daze, like she's just kind of out of it. Percy is trying to get her to snap out of it, reminding her that her father has been listening to her because he sent the angels to help them get to San Francisco. Grover and Percy exchange a look, and luckily Grover knows exactly what to do. He uses his reed pipes to trap the skeleton warriors in vines before telling Bessie to dive underwater. Zoe wants Percy to go with Bessie as well, and to take Bessie to his dad's palace for protection. But Percy's like, I'm not going to leave you guys. And they also need to get word to camp. So they try and iris message Chiron, but end up getting Mr. D instead. It is a frustrating conversation, as every conversation with Mr. D is. But they eventually are like, please, can you just help us? They hear a snap, and it was the sound of many minds breaking at the same time. The sound of madness. One guard put his pistol between his teeth, like it was a bone, and ran around on all fours. Two others dropped their guns and started waltzing with each other. The fourth began doing what looked like an Irish clogging dance. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so terrifying. No, screamed the manticore, I will deal with you myself. His tail bristled, but the planks under his paws erupted into grapevines, which immediately began wrapping around the monster's body, sprouting new leaves and clusters of green baby grapes that ripened in seconds as the manticore shrieked until he was engulfed in a huge mass of vines, leaves, and full clusters of purple grapes. Finally, the grapes stopped shivering, and I had a feeling that somewhere inside there, the manticore was no more. Shockingly, Mr. D actually came through and saved them. Crazy, I know. He does tell them that Zoe knows where they need to go next before the message ends, and Zoe's like, yep, we need to go to the Garden of My Sisters. There is still the issue of Bessie, however, and Grover ends up volunteering to show Bessie how to get back to camp, and Percy, as like a way to like try and give Grover some protection, ends up offering his father the Nemean lion's coat as a sacrifice to assure safe travels for Grover and Bessie. It takes a moment, but this is where Percy realizes who the hero in his dream of Zoe was. It was Hercules, and Percy makes a point to say that he is not going to be like Hercules. Now, there is the issue of getting to the garden, as you can only enter as day turns into night, and it's way too far away for them to get there in time. Thalia then remembers that she knows someone who can get them a car to use. Annabeth's dad is in San Francisco. They get to his place, and he is quick to help them as soon as they tell them that they're friends of Annabeth. Annabeth's stepmom is there as well, which we know. She and Annabeth do not get along, but she honestly seems kind of nice, you know? Even Percy's like, she's oddly nice. And she even says that it's nice to meet Percy since she's heard so much about him. They end up filling Annabeth's dad in on everything, and he offers to drive them, even though it would be faster if they could just take his plane because he's got a plane. And he does eventually let them use his car, and on the way out, Annabeth's stepmom asks Percy to tell Annabeth that she will always have a home with them. So they are driving to the mountain, and the mist is super thick the closer they get to it, and it would be really easy to miss any monsters that are coming towards them. And as they're driving, they see the Princess Andromeda in the bay. So they have reached the base of the mountain. They're just about to get out of the car when a bolt of lightning strikes it. Luckily, everybody is all right, but Thalia is kind of convinced that her dad sent it, but Percy is not so sure. He tries to insist that it has to be a trick by Kronos attempting to manipulate her against her father, but she doesn't really want to talk about it. She does end up thanking him, though, for trying to cheer her up. So the second that they get into the garden, the other 4 Hesperides are there, and they're not happy to see Zoe. She tries to reason with them, but they all tell her that he is too powerful and will absolutely destroy her, and if they try to get up, the sisters will wake the dragon guarding the tree. Then Zoe does something that nobody's expecting. She calls out to wake the dragon Ladon instead, because she believes that because she was once a Hesperide, he will not hurt her. She tells Percy and Thalia to go around up the side of the mountain while she distracts Ladon, and they get almost all the way up there before they hear Zoe cry out in pain. She manages to meet them at the summit, and luckily Ladon doesn't follow since he is there to guard the tree, not the mountain. So, up there, the ruins of Mount Othrys lay, the old Titan fortress and kind of like the Titan's equivalent to Mount Olympus. This is also where the Titan Atlas was imprisoned to hold up the sky. However, Atlas is no longer there, and instead, Artemis is in his place. That is what Luke and Annabeth and now Artemis have had to hold up. The sky itself. Artemis is pleading with them to leave, but they don't get the chance as the general, Luke, and Annabeth in chains appear as well. This is where we learn that the general is none other than the Titan Atlas himself, and he's also Zoe's father. There is something different about Annabeth, though. She now has a streak of gray in her hair from holding up the sky. The strain was that much. They really need Artemis in order to fight Atlas, because they definitely don't think they can do it on their own. But there really isn't anyone else that can take her place, so Percy and Thalia are like, all right, Atlas, let's go. Let's fight. And Atlas is like, I'm not fighting you. Luke, you can go fight them instead. Luke is still insistent that he can convince Thalia to join them, and suddenly a pool of water appears, and Luke tells Thalia to call the Ophiotaurus to her. Thalia just asks Luke what happened to him, and he is really pleading with her, saying that the 3 of them, Luke, Annabeth, and Thalia, can be together again, just like old times. And he even says something about this being his final chance and how he will use the other way otherwise. And there is like real fear in his voice when he says this. So now it is a real battle of words, with Zoe and Percy trying to convince Thalia to not do anything, and Luke trying to get her to join them. All Thalia says is that she doesn't know Luke anymore, and the 3 of them charge. Thalia goes for Luke, and Percy and Zoe go for Atlas. Atlas is quick to slam into Percy, sending him flying towards Artemis. Percy then gets a stupid idea and tells Artemis to let him take the sky, as she is realistically the only one who can really take on Atlas. He slashes through Artemis's chains and takes his place under the sky. Afterward, I tried many times to explain what it felt like. I couldn't. Every muscle in my body turned to fire. My bones felt like they were melting. I wanted to scream, but I didn't have enough strength to open my mouth. I began to sink lower and lower to the ground, the sky's weight crushing me. Fight back, Grover's voice said inside my mind. Don't give up. I concentrated on breathing. If I could just keep the sky aloft for a few more seconds. I thought about Bianca, who had given her life so we could be here. If she could do that, I could hold the sky. Thalia is winning against Luke, but Zoe is struggling with Atlas, and he ends up sending her flying into a pile of rocks. Luckily, though, Artemis is able to get some leverage on Atlas and sends him flying back underneath the sky, allowing Percy to escape and forcing Atlas back into his prison. Thalia has Luke back to the edge of a cliff and has knocked his sword out of his hand. Annabeth is calling out to her to not kill him and that he could be useful, but Thalia has made up her mind. Luke lunges for her spear and she kicks him back over the edge of the cliff. When they look over the edge, they see Luke's broken and unmoving body down below. When all three of them turn around, Zoe is in Artemis's arms, and the goddess tells them that the wound was poisoned. Atlas didn't poison her, though. It was when Ladon bit her, and heartbreakingly, Zoe has to mention that she cannot see the stars. As all this is happening, the monster army below is advancing, but everyone's too stunned to move. Then there's a buzzing noise, and they see a plane swooping in, shooting the monsters down with what seems to be celestial bronze bullets. Annabeth's dad has come to the rescue, and she is just standing there watching in amazement. This distraction, though, has allowed Artemis to find a way to get all of them off the top of the mountain and away from the monsters. Annabeth and her dad get a sweet little reunion, but there is still the matter of Zoe. And here is where one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the books comes. There seems to be nothing that they can do to help Zoe, and the faint glow that always is like around her has started to fade. Artemis even tries to heal her, but she says there's little she can do if the fates have already decided to cut the string. Zoe grabs Artemis's wrist and asks if she's served her well, and Artemis tells her that she has served her with great honor and is the finest of her attendants. This is where Percy realizes that while the poison is sapping her energy, it was her father's final blow that's killing Zoe. She had known what laid ahead of her with the prophecy, and yet still decided to come on this quest. Zoe tells Thalia that she's sorry that they always fought, and Thalia says that she was right about Luke and men. But when Zoe turns to Percy, she says that maybe not all men. And she's honored that he carries that sword. God, I'm gonna cry reading this. This gets me every time. Already, like, low-key tearing up. I already feel it. I can already feel it. Okay. Stars, she whispered. I can see the stars again, my lady. A tear trickled down Artemis's cheek. Yes, my brave one. They are beautiful tonight. Stars, Zoe repeated, her eyes fixed on the night sky, and she did not move again. Thalia lowered her head. Annabeth gulped down a sob, and her father put his hands on her shoulders. I watched as Artemis cupped her hand over Zoe's mouth and spoke a few words in ancient Greek. A silvery wisp of smoke exhaled from Zoe's lips and was caught in the hand of the goddess. Zoe's body shimmered and disappeared. Artemis stood, said a kind of blessing, breathed into her cupped hand, and released the silver dust to the sky. It flew up, sparkled, and vanished. For a moment, I didn't see anything different. Then, Annabeth gasped. Looking up at the sky, I saw the stars were brighter now. They made a pattern I had never noticed before. A gleaming constellation that looked a lot like a girl's figure. A girl with a bow running across the sky. Let the world honor you, my huntress, Artemis said. Live forever in the stars. Fuck, bro. She gets me every time. It gets me every time. Artemis now has to head back to Olympus and says that she's going to send a ride for the others to get there as well. Annabeth's dad says that she will always have a home with him, and they say goodbye before Blackjack and a couple other Pegasi show up to fly them back to New York. On the flight back, Percy and Annabeth get a chance to talk a little bit, and she thanks him for rescuing her and asks if he ever thought that she was dead, and Percy's like, no, never. And then Annabeth's like, Luke's not dead. I know it the same way you knew I wasn't dead. And Percy's like, why would you have to make the comparison? Why would you do that to me? He hates that comparison. However, they finally do spot the New York City skyline, and it is quite clear that the Olympus winter solstice meeting has started. They get to the throne room, and Grover and Bessie are there. Grover tells Percy that he has to convince them not to do it, whatever it is. And Artemis says the gods have been filled in, and that she and Apollo have now been tasked with hunting down the ancient monsters that the Titans might be trying to use to their advantage, and Poseidon has been granted permission to unleash his full fury against the Princess Andromeda. Artemis is then like, all right, these heroes helped me a lot. They have done a great service to Olympus. We should reward them. And Athena's like, yeah, I'd love to reward my daughter, but Percy and Thalia, they are dangerous. And she even mentions that she's very shocked that of all of the big three, Hades was the one to keep his oath. Ares jumps in to agree, saying that these two are dangerous. Even though he was fine with keeping Percy alive to start the war, now he's saying that they're dangerous. Artemis is not happy with the two of them and demands that the heroes be rewarded, but the conversation is not going anywhere, so it ends up changing to the topic of Bessie. Most of the gods are in favor of destroying Bessie, but Percy's like, no, controlling prophecies never works, and killing something as innocent as Bessie is just as bad as Kronos eating his children. Zeus is still worried, but Annabeth's like, hey, you guys need to trust Percy and Thalia. And Artemis agrees, and she's like, all right, I am ready to give up my first reward. But she needs to talk with Zeus first. Now, Percy, he's got a bad feeling about this, so he is low-key kind of panicking. And he turns to Annabeth, and he's like, don't do it. I need to tell you something. I couldn't stand if I don't know what I would do if... And this dude's just stumbling over his words. He cannot get a complete sentence out. And before anything else can happen, Artemis is like, I need a new lieutenant. And Percy is just petrified. And Artemis asks Thalia if she would like to join the hunt. Thalia agrees and says that she won't ever turn 16, and this prophecy will not be about her. Her 16th birthday is literally tomorrow, probably in a few hours, and she's like, I'm never turning 16. She says the vow and gives Percy a hug, telling him that he has to be the hero of the prophecy, and Percy's like, thanks. Love that. Now, one dangerous demigod's out of the way, but there's still Percy to worry about, as well as Bessie. He is pleading with the gods to protect the Ophiotaurus either in his dad's palace or on Olympus. And he's like, I'm literally only 14. There's still plenty of time. It's not like I'm going to turn 16 tomorrow. And Athena's like, well, that's 2 years for Kronos to try and deceive you. And she thinks it's a very bad idea to keep both Percy and Bessie alive. Poseidon then steps up and vouches for both Percy and Bessie. And Zeus agrees they will keep Bessie on Olympus. They all vote on it, and everyone agrees except Ares, Athena, and Dionysus. So, Percy gets to live another day, and it's time to celebrate. Poseidon and Percy get a moment to talk, and Poseidon tells him that he's done well, and also that Luke is alive. Athena is then there, and she's like, I spoke the truth at the meeting. You are dangerous. And his fatal flaw was made to destroy both the gods as well as himself. Athena looked almost sorry for me. Kronos knows your flaw, even if you do not. He knows how to study his enemies. Think, Percy, how has he manipulated you? First, your mother was taken from you, then your best friend Grover, and now my daughter Annabeth. She paused, disapproving. In each case, your loved ones have been used to lure you into Kronos' traps. Your fatal flaw is personal loyalty, Percy. You do not know when it is time to cut your losses. To save a friend, you would sacrifice the world. In a hero of the prophecy, that is very, very dangerous. Percy's too loyal. That is his flaw. Athena then says that she still does not approve of his friendship with her daughter. Annabeth then comes over and is like, hey, what were you trying to tell me earlier? And Percy's just like, I don't know. You know what though? We got interrupted. I still owe you a dance. And Annabeth just grabs his hand and pulls him out on the dance floor. And they finally get to have their dance that they didn't get to have at the beginning of the book. So later, Percy Iris messages Tyson to fill him in. And Tyson's like, hey, just so you know, I'm visiting next summer. And Percy's very excited about this. He then calls his mom, and she's once again with the same guy from before, Mr. Paul Blofus. She is able to get him to go to the other room for a moment, and Percy fills her in too. He then asks if Paul makes her happy, and Sally's like, yeah, he really does. And Percy's like, all right, go for it. No objections. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover then head back to camp and are greeted by Chiron. There is a meeting going on right now. Clarice is finally back from her mission, and she's like, I've got really bad news. I'll fill you guys in later. Percy then confirms that Annabeth was right and that Luke is still alive. Then the moment that Percy was dreading happens. Nico runs into the room asking about his sister, and Percy takes him outside to talk. When he tells Nico about Bianca, he's just silent, and Percy ends up giving him the Hades figurine that Bianca got for him. Finally, Nico just brings up the promise that Percy made to protect Bianca, and it's just a stab in the heart to Percy. He tries to explain that he did try to save her, but she sacrificed herself for everybody else. Nico then says that he shouldn't have trusted Percy, and then confirms that he should have known that Bianca was gone because he felt it. They suddenly hear hissing from behind them, and some of the skeleton warriors have somehow followed them back to camp. Percy is trying to get Nico to run, but he is just standing there with his hands over his ears. I couldn't fight 4 at once, not if they wouldn't die. I slashed, whirled, blocked, jabbed, but they just kept advancing. It was only a matter of seconds before the zombies overpowered me. No, Nico shouted louder. Go away. The ground rumbled beneath me. The skeletons froze. I rolled out of the way just as a crack opened at the feet of the 4 warriors. The ground ripped apart like a snapping mouth. Flames erupted from the fissure, and the earth swallowed the skeletons in one loud crunch. Silence. In the place where the skeletons had stood, a 20-foot-long scar wove across the marble floor of the pavilion. Otherwise, there was no sign of the warriors. Nico runs away, and Percy, Annabeth, and Grover search the woods for hours for him, but there is no luck. Annabeth wants to tell Chiron, but Percy says it's too dangerous to tell anybody that Nico is a son of Hades. Annabeth says that this is really serious because that means Hades also broke his oath. All 3 brothers did. But Percy's like, that's not true. Hades didn't break his oath. Nico and Bianca were in the Lotus Casino for 70 years, meaning that they were born before the oath was made. So if anyone knew that Nico existed, this would cause a lot of fighting amongst the gods. And Percy insists that the prophecy is going to be about him, not Nico and not anyone else. He says that he's not going to allow Nico to be in any more danger, and he owes that to Bianca. They end up telling Chiron that Nico just ran away, and he doesn't really seem to buy their story and just tells Percy to go home for the holidays to his mom. And Annabeth says that she's going to try San Francisco, and this will allow her to keep an eye on the Titans Mountain. Luke is going to need some time to heal, meaning that nothing's really going to happen till at least next summer, so they should be safe to leave for now. Annabeth is about to say something to Percy when Grover bursts into the room saying that he was in the parlor drinking a ton of coffee when he heard someone speaking in his mind. He's frantic, talking about packing, but Percy finally gets him to explain that he heard Pan say 3 words to him. I await you. And that's where we end the Titans Curse. So that is the end of the Titans Curse. I hope you guys enjoyed. We are over halfway through this series now. We only have the last 2 books left. Again, if you don't want to miss those, make sure you turn on post notifications so you don't miss when they are uploaded. Comment down below to tell me what your favorite part of this book is. And I think that's going to be it for today. Keep an eye out for the next part, and I will see you guys in that next one. Bye!